And our first topic is going to be the top three candidates. I think it's become pretty clear over the last day or so who those three are. It's who we would have predicted would be the top three candidates going into this cycle. It's Mike Vrabel, the ex-Titans coach, and then two Lions coordinators, their offensive coordinator, Ben Johnson, their defensive coordinator, Aaron Glenn. And there are 5 openings now. All 5 of those teams, I think, would have some level of interest in all 3 of these guys. You have the 3 that you had coming into the weekend. That's the openings in Chicago, in with the Jets, and then with the Saints, and 2 new openings. The Patriots fired Gerard Mayo right after their game on Sunday, and yesterday the Jaguars fired Doug Peterson as their head coach. We can start with Vrabel here. I think very clearly over the last few weeks, he has been a name that has, and it's, you don't even want to say gotten hot. He's been a name that I think everybody knew there'd be a lot of teams that have interest in him coming into this cycle. He is going to start his interview process with the Bears. There's the obvious connection to New England. I think if Dallas had an opening, they'd be interested in him. And I don't think that he's going into this with the idea that, yes, I have my job. I know where I'm going. You know, he did interview with the Jets last week. Obviously, there's the speculation out there that would get the attention of the Patriots. I don't think that's why they moved on from Gerard Mayo. But, you know, there's the obvious fit there. So we can start with what I believe Vrabel would be looking for based on how things ended in Tennessee. I think he's going to be looking for an organization that will line up with him. I think he's looking for a scouting department, not that he can run, but one that lines up with him philosophically, that will help stock the roster with the types of players the coaches are looking for. You know, and then I also think that he's going to look for a trusting relationship with ownership. Remember, in Tennessee, the ownership situation really sort of turned on him over the course of his last few months there, where Amy Adams-Strunk had been a big advocate of his. And that flipped over the last few months that he was there. And part of it was that Amy Adams-Strunk wasn't in the building on a day-to-day basis. So I think having that sort of trusting day-to-day relationship with the owner is going to be important. Now, is that fit New England? It could be. It certainly could be. I think you look at the Patriots situation, they've got $120 million in cap space. They've got a franchise quarterback in place in Drake May. And Vrabel does have a relationship with ownership in place. Of course, that was on display last year when he was inducted into the team's Hall of Fame. Now, the flip side is the roster is in really, really rough shape. And it may take more than one offseason to get to where you need to be to contend. There's also the environment in New England right now, the expectations. The temperature has been turned up to 100 on a lot of things there. And I think there are some outgoing coaches with the Patriots that would tell you that things have gotten toxic. And that the organization now is one of those that is affected by the environment. So that's certainly something I think any candidate would take a look at and consider when they're looking at the viability of the job. It's something I think Mike Vrabel would consider. Again, he is interviewing with the Bears. I think the Bears are a really interesting fit, just as far as like a city and a football coach. I don't think you can come up with a better fit than the Bears and Mike Vrabel. Vrabel's also maximized players over the course of his career, something that, you can see very clearly. You can see from his work in Tennessee. It's with Ryan Tannehill, of course, getting the most out of Ryan Tannehill. It's also Derrick Henry, who hadn't done a lot before he got there. He helped turn Derrick Henry into one of the best players in all of football, not just at his position. Jeffrey Simmons, developed by Vrabel. Kevin Byard, guy who's maximized under Vrabel. I think the Bears would look at it and say, here's a guy that can maximize what we've got on our roster and also be the sort of leader of men that we're looking for. I think along with Ben Johnson, Glenn and Vrabel have been two names that have been at the top of Chicago's list since they let go of Matt Eberflus. So I think Vrabel is going to have an interest in the Bears job, and I think it's going to be on him then to figure out whether or not he can find the sort of alignment with Ryan Poles there that he's looking for. He and Poles were together in Kansas City for 2 years. Now, I don't want to make too much of that. Poles was a scouting assistant at the time. Vrabel was a player. But Poles also came up under Scott Pioli, meaning that he has familiarity and experience working in the grading system that Vrabel has been in the past. So like I think finding a level of alignment with polls and then finding a level of trust with ownership and Kevin Warren would be important there. Again, I think Vrabel's going into this unsentimental with an open mind, with the idea he wants to go somewhere where he can legitimately compete for a Super Bowl and compete for a Super Bowl fast. And the Bears are probably a little closer to contention than the Patriots are. Again, I think the likelihood would be that maybe that he would end up in New England, but I would not rule out the Bears. I would not rule out the Jets. I would not rule out the Saints. There are strengths to different openings, And again, if the Cowboys were to come open, I think he'd be high on the Cowboys list. You can say similar things about Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn. They're going to be on a lot of people's list. Now, I think there's going to be two different approaches there between the two of them. To me, like Ben Johnson, it's like we've said over the last month, he's going to be looking for alignment with the general manager, and he's going to be looking for an owner that's willing to look at the mistakes of the past and go in and fix them and be part of that partnership and fixing them. If it sounds familiar, that's exactly what he's experienced in Detroit, and seeing the alignment between Dan Campbell and Brad Holmes, and also seeing an owner in Sheila Ford Hamp who's been willing to go in and fix the mistakes of the past and has been willing to fall on the sword and say, we're going to take the time to fix this. There's a really good clip from a couple of years ago of Sheila Fordham coming out and backing Dan Campbell and Brad Holmes when things weren't going so well halfway through their second season. We all know how it turned out now, but it was a good example, I think, of what Ben Johnson is going to be looking for. Obviously, Ben Johnson's work with Jared Goff speaks for itself. So, certainly, I think he'd be one that, if the fit is right in Chicago, would be attractive because he could work with Caleb Williams. But I think he's going to have to find those things in Chicago the same way Vrabel will. Aaron Glenn, I think, is going to be a fit a bunch of different places. He was a player in New Orleans, and a coach in New Orleans. He played and was drafted by the Jets. So he's got strong connections with both New Orleans and the Jets. I think both those jobs will be attractive. I think he's in a little bit of a different place than Ben Johnson is. Ben's a young offensive coach. He can afford to take his time. Aaron Glenn's a little older. He's also a defensive coach. And so I think with guys who are older and coach on that side of the ball, your stock can be a little bit more volatile. So I think Aaron Glenn would probably be a little bit more motivated to take a job during this cycle than Ben Johnson would be. Again, doesn't mean they both won't wind up with jobs. I think they're both going to have opportunity, but the approach might be a little bit different, again, because of age and because of the side of the ball that the two come from. So those would be my top three candidates going into all of this. A little bit of a rundown on each of those guys. Mike Vrabel, obviously the ex-Titans coach, and then the Lions coordinators, Ben Johnson, Aaron Glenn at the top of a lot of lists.